The reason for this webinar today is about creative leadership, and that's a topic that has been really aspiring to me for a long, long time, actually many years. And I think it kind of resonates with both entrepreneurship and then where I see leadership in larger organizations heading. It's about that mindset where it's not a stable environment anymore where we operate. It's an environment where things change rapidly and transition is needed. And that's why the creative kind of landscape comes in very handily. And just kind of telling a little bit about the background for kind of what is the foundation I'm standing on. I have my background in Finland with Henrik School of Economics, and I was there working with entrepreneurship, but also with executive education. And I did my research on industrial designers and why they aspired to become entrepreneurs. And very often they became entrepreneurs because they worked with larger organizations, and they worked as consultants or specialists. And that was kind of the lens I took into kind of looking at entrepreneurship, but also design thinking. And then on top of that, more recently, 10 years ago, I moved to the States and started to work with Halt International Business School, which is a heavily practice-oriented global business school with degrees from bachelor's to all the way to doctors. And then a couple of years ago, I also joined Harvard University, their continued education, where I teach strategic management and also new business venturing. And what kind of brings it all together and what is most exciting for me these days is my own company, LEADX3M, where we work with 25 experts, mostly across fields like strategy, talent, interaction in different ways, communications, and also in terms of execution. And our services kind of span across advising, helping to build, and also, of course, train executives and middle managers. And that's where my heart is for the moment. And like I said, I try to kind of think how things engage and build around that. I would like to warmly welcome those who joined us as well here. I can see Dorian's face there, for example. Great to see you, and Rebecca as well. So that's kind of briefly about my background and what leads us to this topic. Really, I have 3 items I'd like to cover here today. First of all, discuss a little bit about what creative leadership means for me, and do that based on the kind of drivers and elements. And it's very relevant and very topical for me right now. In addition to writing the Poyry case, we're also writing a book right now, which is on creative leadership. And we are looking on a larger kind of sample of companies and trying to identify what creative leadership means in these companies that have claimed success in their own right. And after that, we are going to jump into the Poyry case, which is a really exciting case in itself. And it's been a fantastic journey for me in the past year or so, with great support from Poyry people and writing that case and publishing it just recently. Actually, it was up on the platform. So we're going to dive into that as well. Before we wrap up with something I kind of emphasize, ignoring stability moving forward seems to be inevitable in the landscape where we work and where we operate. And of course, some implementation from there and call for action. Before we move forward, can everyone hear me? Thumbs up.
Very well.
Yeah. It's exciting to see all you ladies and gentlemen on this call. Thanks for taking your time. So first of all, of course, a lot of different megatrends emerging in our direction. And I think also we see a lot of emerging technologies. We have identified at HALT 9 different technologies that are going to disrupt the world as we know it. And of course, it relates to blockchain, robotics, autonomous vehicles, and artificial intelligence, and so on. And all of those are in one way or the other influencing also the businesses that we operate in. I love this model because it shows the industry honeycomb. And I think consolidation is happening in most industries where we operate. And digitalization, of course, is the great driver there. And competition will look very different for all of us if it doesn't look already in the next coming years. And that kind of leads us to this picture, which is pretty disruptive and quite concerning if you are a bank. But if, for example, look on Chase here, if Chase doesn't start thinking in a creative manner, just one company, as an example, Amazon, has created a multitude of different service solutions that are directly competing with the bank services. And as you can see, it's pretty overwhelming. And a bank who is staying stable and doesn't adapt to this environment and try to become more proactive is going to face significant hurdles and challenges. So I think that's kind of try to shock you a little bit in terms of what this implies and why it's so important to think about a world which is not stable, a world where we need to as top leaders, but also as middle managers, and why not also everyone who works with us, the people in the organization. We need to proactively think about how we can adjust and adapt and think about the customer needs, the customer problems on a daily, continuous basis. And this kind of leads to our book, where we do two different things. First of all, we have created this framework over the years based on my research and work, and we kind of look on drivers for creative leadership. We look on creativity in itself, and then we also look on the kind of more fundamental deep dives. What are kind of the values and the culture behind a good environment? And Jennifer from Briesen is someone who has worked for many years with authors like Kim and Marlborough. You may know the Blue Ocean Strategy. She's been consulting that in practice here in the States with large organizations. And most recently, she's working as the VP of Strategy for a large financial institution called State Street. So she's coming to this as a consultant, as an executive in a large organization. I come to this as a consultant, an executive educator, and someone who has a keen interest in trying to establish some kind of an assessment norm, some kind of a tool that allows us to work with public data, with students, of course, as well, looking on companies as a kind of case situation. But on top of that, of course, also diving deep into companies and helping them to assess what is their current status and how they could improve in these areas. And that we can do as on an individual level or looking on the corporation at large. So this book is our kind of night shift job. We do this after midnight when everyone else is asleep. And of course, you can imagine that we would like to see it already published. It's a journey that is kind of writing slowly. The publisher, Routledge, has given us time until February 2020. I've already said to them that it's maybe a little bit later than that, and they are completely okay with it. So we're all excited about the topic, and I think this book is a kind of a new cut to a topic that has been discussed, of course, also by other publishers before, but we are taking kind of our own stance to it and opening it first with public data from roughly 400 businesses, and then we also go into cases and look on 8 cases specifically that we have selected that we think are interesting to open in this book context. So that's in short about the book, and then we move forward to the reason why we're all here. And of course, full disclosure, Norbert, you're in great company. You are here with Dorian, with Rebecca and Hannah, and they all are kind of integral parts of this case to become. And Norbert is someone who works in Denmark. He runs a company called Master HR. And I've known Norbert for many, many years, and we communicate frequently, and I'm very happy to see you here today. Before we get started, any comments, any concerns? All good? Cool. So kind of 2 different angles to this case, and I want to take a personal cut on it because I think that's important to kind of state why we are here today. First of all, networking is immensely important. I was studying at Hanken School of Economics. I did some of the courses in the wrong order. My last class was the principles of accounting, not my strongest topic, and that was kind of a basic intro course. Everyone else did it first, I did it last. I was not alone. I sat in the class with a gentleman called Johan, and Johan was as keen on accounting as I was. So we spoke a lot. Time passed, and Johan became the country manager for Cornan Ferry in Finland. And I reached out to him not that long ago, perhaps 1.5 years ago, saying that I would like to write a case about a fantastic Finnish or Nordic company that is thinking about entrepreneurship. Who should I look at? And he was like, without blinking, he was, look on Poyry. They are all about entrepreneurship. They really know this space, and they're talking about it all the time. They have a relatively new CEO who is really keen on this topic. And of course, I got this really warm feeling when he mentioned Poyry. And the reason, of course, was that I grew up with Poyry in Finland, a company that was founded in '58 by Jaakko Poyry, a gentleman who really took the Finnish engineering not only on a European level, international, but he actually went global very early. 40 years ago to Brazil, when people were not even faxing, they were barely telexing. So the communications, of course, back then were very different from what we have today. I will never forget the moment when I was walking past the home where Poyry lived in his last years, Jaakko Poyry's single family home outside Helsinki with my grandmother. And my grandmother, who came from an entrepreneurial family, pointed at a 7-year-old Henrik saying, look on that building there, it's owned by Mr. Jaakko Poyry. He's the one who took the Finnish entrepreneurial landscape, but also engineering global. And I still remember as yesterday that conversation with my grandmother. And she was a lady who she didn't praise anyone easily. So that has kind of been sticking with me all these years. So when you look on the list here, this is from 2005, and you can see that Poyry was then and still today, of course, continues to be a company relating to energy, forest industry, and industry at large, infrastructure and environment. And a very impressive list of different countries where offices are, and of course, on top of that, projects in many, many more countries. I would like to take you to year 2008, which in history became the best ever year for Poyry. And you can see that all the kind of financial metrics are showing upward and a very, very positive landscape. You also see on this slide a list of different projects that the company has been involved in. And Poyry is that kind of really well kept secret. It's a company that is involved in our everyday lives, but a company that doesn't every time come out as a brand for a consumer like us. But nevertheless, we benefit and we are supported and we utilize many of their services on a daily basis. That's why I think this listing, looking on different projects, is so impressive. And of course, for a layman like me, also kind of puts Poyry on the map, understanding that it has a role in my everyday life. But the reality is that 2008, as we know in many cases, was a year of great kind of culmination. We had a family business which was doing really well as well in 2008, and in 2009 it was all dark clouds. We actually had to sell the business and were able to sell it in those days. But I remember those days like yesterday. Best times ever turned into a very sour party. So it did for Poyry as well. 40% of their main business disappeared overnight, and that came, of course, with a lot of different issues. Here is from a press release from those days, kind of a little bit later on in 2009, 2010. Talking about some of the issues that emerged. And as you can see, the horizon for a company of Poyry's size operating in over 40 countries, and of course with an almost 1 billion euro, $1 billion business, was definitely in if not dire straits, at least in a very quick consolidation mode. So when we look on Poyry's success until 2008, it really was built on Jaakko Poyry's trust in his people. So he was actually expanding rapidly from Finland by sending his best trusted allies and collaborators around the world and building the success based on that. And of course, over the years, they also acquired a lot of businesses. And those businesses were heavily independent, allowing to operate within this umbrella of Poyry in an independent fashion, operating closely to the customers, helping them to succeed in their projects. And of course, a word that I've heard many times when I worked with Poyry people was the customer kind of project manager is the king in the house. It's the person who is closest to the customer and understands the customer problem. And this, of course, model was this story of the success and Jaakko Poyry's legacy, if you want. And of course, suddenly, when you end up in a situation where 40% of your business vanishes, and not only that, you end up in different legal disputes, customers are not paying, and you have a very kind of a high fixed cost in your company, and you need to quickly change. The only way to change is to make a fundamental shift in your organization. And that's really what Poyry had to do. So basically reorganize and bring a lot of the independence back home. And back home was Poyry's headquarters in Vantaa in Finland. And suddenly you have 45 different countries, all offices all kind of reporting back to the core. And you can imagine in order to make this happen, you also had to build a large executive management team who were kind of overseeing all of the activities from the headquarter perspective. So kind of a fundamental shift, and suddenly the heavy independence in the regions turned into a heavy consolidation at the head office. And of course, money was governed by the head office. And of course, I'm looking on Rebecca, knowing that, for example, communications in the organization was reporting into legal. So rather than thinking kind of market oriented, you had a legal head who was in charge of communications in this organization, describing kind of the concerns and of course also the priorities in the organization. So then moving forward, we kind of come into a new situation here, and this is kind of leading us into 2015. And think about it, 2008 financial crisis, 2009 all the way till 2015, the company is going through a very dark time in terms of trying to find its new belonging. And that's when I think that the case also kind of steps in and really starts emphasizing what's there lying ahead. And that's where entrepreneurship starts to become really interesting. And why? Here is a cut from a press release, and this is coming from one of the owners and also the chairman of Poyry, Henrik, stating that we need a new CEO, and we have found one, a gentleman who actually graduated from ETH in Zurich, and soon after his graduation joined Electrovat, which was acquired by Poyry. So it was actually a Poyry unit, and he worked there for some years and then moved forward into executive roles at Siemens and held big positions, for example, leading a team of 9,000 people through a similar kind of change management journey that Poyry underwent afterwards. And Dorian here on the call has been involved with some of it with Martin, and has worked very closely at Siemens before you joined Poyry, fully knowing kind of that experience. And Martin came in with the legacy that we have done most of the heavy lifting. What we now need to do is just turn on the engine and start making Poyry profitable again. And I think that Martin soon realized after not only talking to top executives, he had a fairly big executive team, as I mentioned earlier, but he actually went way deeper into the organization to talk to middle managers, talk to the people who were closer to the customers and closer to the operative problems to understand what are the things that are good, what are the things that are not perhaps so good, and what are the things that we need to fix. And he soon realized that the organization was kind of mentally, culturally in a place that was perhaps not so positive. People were blaming each other, people were concerned, people had still a very strong pride of working for Poyry, which had that legacy of being the top engineering firm in its region and of course also globally in its niches. And nevertheless, something was obviously wrong because the engine was not turning quickly enough. So Martin came in and had those conversations and soon also realized that we need some actions here. And it's amazing to see how the 10-step program came about. And in the case, actually, I use Rebecca as the protagonist who tells the story of as a communications head, how the team was getting smaller, budgets were being cut, and so the situation was pretty dire. And then how Martin brings together the 200 plus leaders in the organization to start thinking about how does the future look like. And that's kind of really a transparent moment when it's not about glorifying the situation. It's about transparently telling where we are so that we can all collectively start building the future. And when you look on the steps here, I think this is a great example of a change management process that is very clear for anyone in the organization, and especially with the help from close managers to set the expectations and to understand how to implement some of these steps. I think it's easy to resonate with. One of the things that Martin emphasized, and I've also heard it from his colleagues, is that we never changed the 10-step process. We kind of defined it, we implemented it, we started to communicate it, we built our key performance metrics around it, and still today, it's one of the core elements in the organization. And I think that's the power of it. It's so simple and so straightforward that it adapts over time, and nevertheless, it has all of those key elements to make a successful company come alive. And I think foremost, of course, it's about making that project manager again a king, so that we start emphasizing the customer more than anything else. So when we solve customer problems, then everything else should kind of support that journey. So this graph, this model, when I saw it, it didn't take many minutes for me to kind of fully absorb its power and its essential kind of ingredients, and also seeing how other firms could learn from it and start thinking and acting in a similar way. With that said, it's not easy. So when we kind of move forward, we realize how hard it actually was. This is from a press conversation where you can see that our newly minted CEO is looking quite troubled. And the reality is that a lot of the activities had been kind of communicated and the plan was ready, but the results were waiting for themselves. And it was perhaps slower than anyone wished for. And of course, standing as a public company CEO in front of the press is always a pressing situation. And from these moments, Martin, for example, said that one of the analysts came up to him, and that's also in the case, came up to him and said that, "Are you ready to get fired?" That this is the kind of position where most people before you have been just fired very rapidly. Are you ready to get fired? And of course, that's not a very nice situation to be in when you're trying to build something and you trust your instinct, and you trust also your structure. And I think that's where he relied heavily, of course, on the people he worked with, and also had the support from the people around him and also from outside. So when we look on the progress, one kind of key moment that Martin emphasized was a train ride from the Helsinki airport to the headquarters in Vantaa. And this is a fictive picture. It's not really a Poyry employee, but I just want to kind of emphasize that there was this engineer who was sitting on the train. And this was half a year into the journey of putting the 10-point program in place. And the engineer, in a frank manner, said that honestly, my department, my unit, we haven't even started to think about it quite yet. We are kind of started to have a conversation, but 6 months into it, we really haven't done anything with it yet. And the reason is that before you, we had 3 different CEOs, and all of them were throwing crisis packages after crisis packages on us, and they were trying to get us to move. And we realized soon that none of these will stick, and it's better to kind of weather them out and wait for the next one to come, rather than invest a lot of concern and energy in trying to make that change happen. And then he continued saying that since you have been here for a long time and we realized that you're not changing your messaging at all, you just keep repeating yourself, and more we hear this message coming from all directions, we are starting to realize that this is here to stay, and we are starting to change and act and behave towards those goals. And of course, gradually, the market, of course, was there quite positively supporting, but you can also see that the financial numbers are increasingly starting to show that things are starting to turn around in this organization. But that kind of sets the tone in the organization where you think 80% of the employees have a higher education degree. Each individual here is a free thinker, and they are quite critical to change, as you can imagine. When it's stated from above, you want to think through it yourself and what it means for you in practice. So changing a global complex organization like this takes time, and that's what we saw also in this case. So then moving forward, here are the different individuals that I was closely tied to when we discussed through this case, and I kind of got insights and feedback. And I would like to kind of emphasize some of the things I learned here. And I think especially, of course, Rebecca played an instrumental kind of role in explaining how this changed her landscape. The fact was that the budget was cut significantly, and for communications. From in the past going extensively to different types of exhibitions and rolling out the brand, Rebecca was tasked to return to the table and redesign her entire team, and she was doing that with 30% of the overall budget, and kind of in a frugal entrepreneurial manner was able to build a global presence for Poyry, and doing that with digital means. And I've been immensely impressed by following Poyry, of course, on LinkedIn and other platforms, and realizing how you've been able to engage 5,500 people to sing the same kind of song and supporting each other in the branding efforts. And of course, also measuring all the efforts in really great kind of reporting structures, allowing everyone in the organization to understand what the kind of communications strategy is, how we are actually performing, and how everyone can help you. Another individual here on this slide is Fabio, who runs Brazil. And Brazil was traditionally one of the biggest kind of success stories in the Poyry realm. And suddenly the paper industry and the kind of mill industry there vanished and became very, very kind of, how should I say, kind of saving centric rather than investment centric. And most of Poyry's business there went away. And when Fabio became the president, a couple of things that emerged in our discussions. There are many examples, but I think one was the way he redesigned the reward system. When he could not pay lavish bonuses, he started instead to think about what are the things I can do. And one of the things was, of course, when they had been consolidating the team in Brazil, they had a lot of empty parking spots, and parking spots in Sao Paulo are on premium. So he made different ways for staff to win a parking spot for the week or the month. And that way, it didn't cost anything to the company. But first of all, it was great recognition for the individuals who got the parking spots. And on top of that, of course, also it was convenient for them to be able to park close to the door rather than pay for parking. And that's just one of the many, many examples from what he was able to do there. But I think at the core, it was about bringing the leadership in Brazil to the same level as the entire team and ensure that people kind of are transparent about the performance, about the expectations, and the realities. And with that, of course, came the reality that some of the staff members were let go because of the tough times. And that was done in as long as possible with an ambassador mentality. So when people were let go, they also had the opportunity to eventually come back when the company was performing better. And even more interestingly, many of the former employees have become clients because they loved the Poyry environment, and they realized that they were not let go because of themselves. They were let go because of the tough times, and that created this opportunity for them to hire Poyry when the times emerged from there. And then, of course, Hanna, who is also here on the call, a fabulous kind of HR asset who brought of course, the journey alive and ensure that people started to kind of get developed around entrepreneurship, and of course also measured around entrepreneurship. And one measure there that has been kind of an important one is, of course, how do you see Poyry as an employer? You as an employee, how do you feel about your work? And when Martin joined, those numbers were still not in shape, or quite on the opposite. The 2014 numbers for staff satisfaction were pretty unsatisfying. And with Hannah's and her colleagues' great work, the story is very different today. And on top of that, the HR team, along with the other leadership, have been establishing over the years a builders network. So you have 125 individuals in this organization who carry proudly not a kind of hierarchical decision-making role, with the kind of the flag of being a builder, a go-to person when it comes to the cultural aspects of entrepreneurship, but also in terms of kind of implementing some of the elements. And of course, they also have a close relationship with the sponsoring parties, being the top leadership. And that's an important element in an organization like this. How do you get sponsorship from the top leadership so that these builders and others feel that they are supported with their activities? From this slide, I think one story that really struck to me as an entrepreneurial example is Martin's personal executive assistant, Abigail. She was talking about the kind of concern for her when she was told that you need to be more customer-centric. She didn't quite first realize how she could do that. And then she figured out that the best way she could do that is to actually ask for 20% of Martin's schedule moving forward. And rather than just kind of booking retroactively meetings, she started to proactively reach out to clients that Poyry was not working with yet, and booking meetings for Martin with their top leadership. And that way, actually, she became a really integral part for Poyry to build new customer relationships that perhaps engineers at large had a hard time to reach. But when the president of Poyry approached the top leadership in the organizations and they had a good conversation, then as a consequence, the entrepreneurs would have a much easier time to enter the organization as well. And I thought that was kind of a great example of an entrepreneurial engagement and activity. And then perhaps finally, I would like to point out Juuso Pajunen, who is the CFO, and he was someone who was 34 years old when he took over this job. And he had been a long time with Poyry, like, for example, Hannah and Rebecca as well. And Juuso's legacy was, of course, that he had been there when the organization was a holding structure, and he was talking about that kind of entrepreneurial realm, but he had also gone through all the changes and was, of course, also feeling some of the frustrations of the organization not ticking. So when Martin appointed him, the first assignment was just to fix the cash flow, ensure that you get the cash flow in place. And he was able to do that by kind of taking some of the concentration of power in the kind of finance realm and creating guardrails so that regions had a little bit more freedom to make decisions that kind of freed up the organization to start moving and self-organizing and ensuring that you satisfy the client in the regions as well. Fantastic people. I've spent almost 2 hours with each of them and more, and I've learned so much about Poyry, but also about the great people behind the organization. And without them, of course, the case wouldn't be anything. So a great thank you to everyone, and especially those on the call here today, and also others. So when I look on kind of the success of Poyry, of course, the Poyry DNA kind of brings together all the aspects, but I think on top of that, some key elements I've kind of noticed. It's the training, the commitment, and of course also the metrics, how all of these tie together. And when I've seen the way people are onboarded to Poyry, also how they are reviewed on an annual basis, it all goes back to the 10-point structure and ensuring that regardless of your role in the organization, you are kind of committed to what you're doing, and you set the expectations in your teams, and you have clear metrics that kind of bring that together. And I really love the kind of the entrepreneurship statement. This should be about your money, your company. So whatever role you play in Poyry, think and act and behave as it's your money and your company, and you're going to be in a good place. And of course, with that comes the one Poyry, and Dorian, who just left the call, when she joined, she started with the innovation platform structure, and with very impressive results already in the first year, building competitions, and competitions which were not region against region, but on the opposite, competitions that allowed people from different regions to help each other and support innovation to really come into fruition. And I've had a glimpse into the systems and seen some of the results, and you could really see that the one Poyry kind of came alive through innovation. And I think these kind of ecosystems that build on the employees, and on top of that, of course, also on partners from the surrounding networks around the world, are immensely powerful. And that's something that Poyry was able to put in place and is building as they move forward. I also think that the very lean and transparent communication has been a key here. Martin let me in on his videos, that kind of quarterly videos to the staff, and I've watched most of them by now. And I have to say that the way he comes across as the top leader, the way his team and everyone working together with him comes across is just super transparent. And it has to do a lot with communicating the expectations, where you are currently, where we would like to be. But of course, each and every one of these videos, they start with recognizing people. And recognizing people for achievements that are in line with the objectives and the goals of the organization. And that was something that really warmed my heart. And when Martin was in my Harvard summer school course, in the strategic management course, when we launched the case, he was extensively talking about the importance of being very close to people, listening to them, but also, of course, when they do something good, recognize them. And when they are doing something that is counterproductive, help and nurture them in the right direction. My feel is that the culture that he brought in and was able to build together with the people that he appointed created this high expectation, high demand kind of culture, but at the same time a very warm atmosphere where you can you can afford loss as long as you think about why it took place and consequences. And it's really about turning failures, if you want, into learning, and never kind of repeating the same failure again. And that's something that I really feel was part of the DNA. And one thing about transparency I really enjoyed was seeing how, for example, a company of this size, 5,500 employees in 45 different countries, they use a free application called WhatsApp for their internal communications. And even Martin and I, we started to communicate on WhatsApp. And this is a press release statement when at the end of 2018, Poyry comes out and states that 67% profit improvement year on year. And of course, all the numbers had been growing and improving for the past 10 quarters. So really an impressive turnaround, and company in great shape. In a normal kind of public company, you would expect that the CEO would send you an email saying that, please go and have a look on this press release, blah, blah, blah. Here it's no statements whatsoever. Proud CEO sends you a link. And then I respond, whoa, great progress, very impressive indeed. And then, of course, as a proud CEO responds, entrepreneurship company. And that's the kind of mentality that I found in this company so exciting. You can be a public company, you can still be progressive when it comes to the way you communicate within and also with stakeholders outside. And this slide kind of consolidates the journey, and I think it shows in a way when Martin joined and the initial struggles trying to turn this company, and you can see that it definitely hasn't been easy. One of the kind of the elements there, of course, was introducing the change management action and journey, but at the same time also the enforcing the organization to change. And one drastic kind of result from this was that Martin sat with his top leadership team and asked around the table, I think they were at that time a little bit less than 15, asked each and every one of them, would you invest in our company today? And the result you can see on the slide there, basically the executive team was cut down to 5, and only a few of the persons around the table remained. And the reason was that the executives themselves didn't believe in a strong future for the company. And if the executives don't believe, then it's very hard to make change happen. So Martin brought that this magnitude and the size of the team down, but he also promoted from within, bringing in quite junior people, like I mentioned, Juuso and others, into this team. And of course, with that, showed to them that they can be key stakeholders in making this change happen. And they had the support of the entire organization because they were known people, but they were also very hungry to learn and make change take place. And then gradually, of course, we are kind of heading towards current days, and you can see that the kind of point when the press release came out in terms of the good results, but you can also see a bigger news there when Poyry announced that they are merging with ÅF from Sweden, and ÅF is one of their dear competitors, perhaps more centralized in Nordic countries and Sweden in particular, but roughly the double the size when it comes to staff. And one could ask, is this an expected outcome after a fabulous turnaround like this, or should Poyry have continued as an independent organization? My view is that the rapid change in the industry, the rapid changes in the environment probably caused this timing to take place. We are at the top currently of the curve when it comes to the probably to the industry cycle. So the investors and the owners and also the top executives in the organization were very supportive of this merger. And it's going to be interesting to follow how the new large organization is going to continue with the entrepreneurial mandate. And at least so far, what I see is that it's still heavily supported, and I hope it continues like that. And I also think that ÅF in itself has had that entrepreneurial backing, perhaps a little bit more structured even, like Poyry used to be as a holding company structure compared to what it is today. So that's the Poyry case in itself. I'm going to return a little bit to some of the learnings. Before I do that, I just want to kind of emphasize, when we look on transformation, it's never easy, of course, and typically these large organizations, they need a really, really good reason to start changing. And like in Poyry's case, the reason was not really the positive growth or the strategy. Those could have been the reasons, but the reasons were really crisis related. The company was in a dire place, and for that you really needed to start thinking about how do we turn this ship, and we need to do it quickly. And that's kind of the reality there. I think that what I've learned from this case, and of course also from being involved in this space, it's really important to conduct a lot of pilots. And I think the reality is that it requires a cross-functional structure. And in Poyry's case, I also think it required cross-regional structures. And I think more than ever today, Poyry has become an organization where people across different regions work collaboratively together towards global clients, and not only within their regions and then kind of ignoring what happens on a global scale. So that consolidation has been very important, and also finding client cases. For example, Brazil, they moved into the food industry, and they became kind of a forerunner for the food industry business, not only in Brazil and Latin America, but also globally, because they were able to build a niche of that area and create success. So the piloting in Brazil scaled up to something that became much, much bigger than originally even thought. So these pilots are really important. And I also think that the kind of having some kind of a consolidated board system, so that you don't only expect middle managers or division leaders to be in charge of this. And this is where kind of the Poyry structure, where Martin, together with a small team on top, were the ones who were kind of accountable for everything, was the key to success. And it even went so far that the board in itself in Poyry squeezed in size, so it became much smaller, so that there was really this quick decision making and few heads coming together to make decisions. So rapid washing machine type of interaction, so that the decisions were really quickly made, and in order to kind of move forward the company. And of course, then the builders, this structure came a little bit later in the journey. First, builders were not defined, and they were defined in the journey as a kind of a needed element to speed up the process. And I think that that's something that is key. You need to find these sponsors, people in the organization who are excited about what you're trying to achieve, and they are the ones who show always a positive face, but also collect some of the feedback so that top leadership knows what's going on in the organization and can react to those topics and issues. And then, of course, it's about creating that own language. In Poyry's case, entrepreneurship was a new word. It had not existed in that kind of realm. And even Martin was kind of thinking a little bit back and forth, was that the right word? But I think everyone felt pretty pleased with it. But of course, also a high performance company, Poyry people, all of these different definitions and terms became the language, and it became that secret code. And when you go today on LinkedIn and look on the great work that Rebecca has done together with others, you can see these words repeated again and again and again. Hashtag this, hashtag that, and it creates that common language that we are in this together. And that's immensely important to build culture. And here you see some of the kind of the learnings from the Poyry case. And of course, those who are familiar with John Kotter can feel the kind of his process, the 8 steps closely here. And I think that resonates well with the values of Martin. He's a big fan of John Kotter. And when he was in my class at Harvard, we happened to bump into John Kotter as well. And it was fun to be the fly in the room listening to someone who has 3-4 times used the Kotter method. And on top of that, of course, Kotter getting excited of hearing how his model has been put into practice. That was kind of an exciting situation for all of us involved. But here you see some of the learnings, and I think there are key learnings for Poyry, but I think there are much more so even learnings for the general audience, and I think also for companies at large. So of course, it's about kind of raising continuously bar for kind of opportunities, and realizing that the competition is not really inside. The competition is outside. And how do we beat the competition day after day together as a collective, rather than us fighting against each other internally? And that's kind of, I think, a key learning. It's about the, of course, urgency of the change. And this is, of course, a key factor also from Kotter. And if you don't create that urgency, then people are not going to change. You remember the Poyry engineer on the train who kind of said, yeah, I've heard what you are saying, but we haven't really done anything with it yet. And how do you create that urgency? How do you get everyone involved in starting to push for that change? And in Martin's case, he started from the top and then ensure that all the regions got involved so that everyone felt that it was one Poyry, one company, and we were proud to be Poyry people. But of course, for this, you needed a good vision, and the 10-step program was one that resonated with the top leadership, but it resonated also with the executive assistants and everyone else in the organization. Everyone could see how they could kind of pitch and chime into it. And if they had any questions or concerns, it could always be discussed with a close manager, and expectations could be set in a clear manner so everyone understood what it meant for them and they could kind of buy into it. And of course, in this, I think communication both internally and externally. And of course, I think about the videos that were produced internally. I think about all the travels and trips that were made. But I also think about Cornell Ferry's country manager coming to me, and I ask about all the companies you know, which is the company you would do a case study on? And the only company he mentions is this one. So it's not only communication within the organization, it's also communication from outside that is so immensely powerful. And you can imagine for the people working for Poyry, when people start from outside asking questions about what are you guys up to, it sounds exciting. That stimulates and builds confidence even further. And then, of course, removing barriers. So I think at Poyry, it was a lot about simplifying structures, processes, and also automating where you could. And that's, of course, something that is still a continuous journey. And I know that Dorian has been building a lot of that IT capability with systems and processes to ensure that the company is not manually working on areas that are not forced to be manually completed. And of course, then the recognition piece with short-term wins. I have to say, Martin, even in my class, when students were able to interact with him in a way that resonated, he immediately recognized them and they felt it. And even in my feedback from the course, they were saying that, what an amazing person. I would love to work for him. He would be someone who could take us through a lot of kind of bad situations. And I think the power there is to really get the team to think that they can do it themselves. It's about self-organizing and allowing people to take that entrepreneurial role and then supporting them. And at best, you lead by asking questions rather than dictating what needs to be done. And of course, when you have something to celebrate, life is too short not to. So ensure that those who have done well are recognized and celebrated. And it's not always about money. On the opposite, often it's about, in the case, for example, we describe the platinum card. So it's basically representatives of those teams that are doing better than average and are above the norm when it comes to return on sales are going to receive a card. And that card doesn't cost much to print, but it's something that you can carry in your wallet, show your family, your friends, and your team that, God damn it, we have done it. We are the top elite of this company. And that, of course, creates a culture where other teams want to become one as well. And then I think the last point, of course, is about commitment. And Martin had read somewhere that it takes 17 times to communicate for change to take place. And he said that repetition is really needed to reach everyone. And I'm again thinking about that engineer on the train. It's not only about them hearing what needs to be done, but it's also about them kind of taking the change to heart and understanding what it means in their specific roles, in their specific teams, what they need to achieve. So if we kind of take back this to our book and what we can do in the book, we have created an assessment tool that kind of looks on 5 key elements for each of these 9 variables. And this allows us to do a very quick assessment. I currently use this in my class when I read cases or when we cover cases with students. I will ask after each case, kind of give me a rating. What do you think about the strategy? What do you think about the talent, interaction, and execution? We don't go into all the elements, but we do the kind of drivers. And that gives a kind of a nice read. And when we create this kind of a journey of cases, we can start comparing them and we have a discussion point. Quite crude, I admit to that, but it's a tool that is interesting for conversation purposes. In the book, we have defined public data sources that actually allows us to look on company public data and look on all of these 5 kind of variables for each of the elements, and that kind of is what we use when we analyze these public companies. We are also or we also have a deep dive tool which has specific questions for an organization, for individuals working there, and also for the organization itself. And that allows us to score the company in itself, and that's something that we're going to be revealing in the book, and a tool that we are calibrating constantly and continuously as we are working forward to publication. That's basically what I had in this call. So basically what we have done here, we have looked a little bit on perhaps my or our view on creative leadership. We jumped into the world of Poyry, which is a fascinating one to me. And like I said, fascinating and fantastic people who have brought a company from pretty dark times and brought it back to light. And of course, a great immense pride for engineering at large, and of course, engineering in the Finnish Nordic context. And I'm really excited to see where that company goes as it moves forward. And then we wrapped up by looking on some of the learnings from the Poyry case, and also kind of generally thinking about in what kind of context is this relevant. And of course, also realizing that if you don't have a crisis situation to get buy-in and get kind of the muscle moving, is not easy. But if you think back on the case of Chase and Amazon, we realized that all businesses represented out there are bound to be disrupted in one way or the other in the coming years if they haven't been already. So if we don't start adapting quickly to a creative leadership style and ensuring that everyone we have in-house and in our ecosystems are actively thinking about what's out there as a next step for us, we are going to be in trouble. So in that sense, I think that this story of Poyry is a very promising one. When you get the people behind and you start moving towards set vision and objectives, there is a great future ahead, even for a troubled company.